Pixie, we're tweeting some real crazy stuff. What's going on? Talk to me.
Okay, to understand where I'm coming from, like, we have to start from the perspective of, like, I guess history, right? And I know that we talked about this in the last podcast and we disagreed, but I truly believe that right now, the closest point in history America has ever been to, like, right now, like, the closest parallels is seen, like, in 1920s, right? Where you have big economic differences between, like, rich and lower class, where you have, like, you know, a Great Depression, recession, where the world, you have rising ideologies of, like, fascism and authoritarianism, and where, at least in the US, what I think, like, curbed that or didn't let it take place was the whole implementation of, like, FDR's policies, that I think today would even be considered socialist, just because of how much, like, the term socialist has kind of shifted in a sense. So I look at what we have now and I get really scared because I think Donald Trump has fascist tendencies. I think that he does talk about a lot of nationalist rhetoric. He, you know, blames minorities, Hispanics, specifically targeting them. Same time, like, the whole idea of like this powerful enemy at the same time is, like, all powerful but all weak, right? Like, at the same time, like, he sees them kind of, I would say, as, like, degenerates. So I look at the recent Donald Trump policy that he put into place, where he suspends evictions and foreclosures, which is, like, a policy that not even Obama took into place in 2008, right? So this is, like, considered what I would consider, like, a lefty policy. And then I see talk about implementing perhaps, like, a UBI. And I think, like, yeah, if you have a, you know, candidate that espouses, like, nationalism, now suddenly passing, like, a couple of, like, lefty policies that are, I would go as far as to say, considered populist, that the Democratic establishment did not pass, then you're going to have populists who used to be for Bernie Sanders, right? Because they're like, Bernie Sanders has a lot of populist policies as well, who care more about, like, populism than progressivism. So I think those people are going to be much, much more inclined to vote for freaking Donald Trump than for Joe Biden. And that's really scary to me because I think, like, Trump is honestly a pathway to fascism. So,
okay, so
that's
one
where
thing,
my view comes.
So a few things to keep in mind so that we can kind of be a little bit careful with the comparisons that we're drawing. So my understanding of the Great Depression is that the entire world's economy lost 25% of its GDP, that it was, like, an unimaginably horrible thing.
Yeah.
Whereas by comparison, I think 2007 was, like, a couple percentage points. It was definitely bad, but nowhere near the level of economic destitution that the Great Depression left us. 2007 wasn't like that.
And BTFO and GTFO.
Right now, I don't think that this coronavirus is going to be like that. It's going to suck for a while, of course, but I mean, maybe we'll get there. We'll see. I'm sorry, 2008, not 2007. First thing to keep in mind, in terms of, like, suspending foreclosures and whatnot, Obama took a ton of actions, including TARP, to kind of, like, make it so that the economy doesn't completely and totally die during the 2008 financial crisis. It wouldn't really have made sense to suspend foreclosures during that crisis, though, when the crisis was literally a housing crisis, right? Like, overvalued property and everything was, like, a huge driver for what actually caused everything to collapse. I'm not sure if the government intervening on behalf of people to stop those properties from foreclosing, I don't know if that would have been a good idea or not. I'm not sure. In terms of implementing UBI, I don't think Trump is going to implement UBI. I think he's probably just going to do a 1 or 2 time, like, cash stimulus, which, I mean, even George Bush did that, that $600 check or whatever that went out to everybody for that stimulus. And I think, was Cash for Clunkers, was that under Obama? I think it was. You're a little young for that, but I think I remember that, where basically you could take, like, any old car in and trade it in for, like, it was a lot of money, I think. I don't remember what it was, but it was to get old cars off the road. So, I mean, like, people have, like, implemented these types of cash transfers before. They're not completely unheard of. Yeah, I don't think that Trump is, like, doing some, like, I don't know, to call Trump's economic policy, like, lefty. I guess, like, you could call it lefty, strictly speaking, maybe, but definitely not progressive in any sense of the word. I don't think so. I don't think there's a huge worry that, like, progressives are going to vote for Trump just because, you know, he's trying to keep the economy afloat.
So there's a couple of things here, right? I get like earlier on when I was like tweeting, I definitely got confused with the word like progressive and like populist, right? So my argument is not that progressives are steadily going to start voting for Trump, as much as it is that like populists who used to align with like Bernie Sanders because of his populist policies and used to align with like progressives are going to like see what Trump is doing and then, you know, go for it. I think, yeah, it really depends. I think if it's a 1 or 2 time like cash stimulus, I don't think that's going to be enough to like declare like a populist policy. But I do think if it is implemented as like a like I don't want to say like standard thing. I don't really know the right word for it. I'll use standard because I can't think of another word. As a standard thing, then I do think it's something to like maybe worry about.
Well, but I mean, if that was the case, then I mean that would be a win. Then I mean, if you, strictly speaking, there's 2 ways to look at it. Is one, you would be forcing the current president to endorse some form of what we would consider a left-leaning economic idea, which would technically be good. And then 2, I think something that's more important than that, I don't think that there are that many like hardline populists that are voting for Bernie. I know that online it seems that way, that there's a lot of socialists, there's a lot of populism. I think that like the main, like Bernie shared a huge coalition of voters of like working class, uneducated or lack of education people that with Biden, like Bernie Biden shared that coalition of voters. I don't think that all of these people are like insane populists that are ready to just vote for Trump. I think that's, I don't think that'll happen. That doesn't seem to be the case, at least.
You're right that I'd have to look at the numbers of like Bernie and Biden supporters that overlap that way. Because like I'm kind of, I guess, still stuck in like 2016 logic. I just sent you like an article about like Bernie supporters like in key states and like key swing states that voted for Trump. But you're right that I would have to look at Biden and Bernie supporters and where they overlap.
Sure. And I mean, like Bernie, so this article has to do with the title of this article is The Bernie Voters Who Defected to Trump, explained by a political scientist. So these Bernie voters did defect to Trump. But one thing we have to be careful of, and now we have a little bit more information because of how the current primaries are ran, we don't know if these voters defected to Trump because they had a populist bend or because they were anti-Democratic Party or whatever, versus how many of these voters just really didn't like Hillary Clinton, who is a super ultra-hated politician. Because states that Bernie either won overwhelmingly last time, like I think Washington or Michigan, right? Or like Rust Belt states like Michigan, he lost like pretty handily to Biden this time. So it seems like maybe it was less about populism and maybe less about that type of political ideology and more just Hillary Clinton was a deeply unpopular politician due to the years and years and years of relentless attacks on her by the FBI, by the media, and then by Republicans in Congress.
Okay, then yeah, like I definitely have to like retake that into consideration to decide like if I still keep my standpoint or not. I don't know exactly how we'd find the numbers until like after voting about the amount of people who like defected from like Bernie to like Trump or kept with Biden.
Well, I mean, even if they did, like, what's the alternative? I mean, it's not like, I mean, some people that were going to vote for Bernie will probably invariably vote for Trump. I mean, I'm sure it's the same. A lot of Yang supporters will move too. And some percentage of voters from everybody else will probably move around. But I mean, that's just the nature of a primary system and the nature of the elections. Like some voters move around. Like there's not much you can do about it, no?
Yeah, no, it's just my biggest fear is that the whole idea of like passing populist policies that kind of like are appealing to the left is going to bring like voters who were populist who used to align with progressive ideals to the other side. Like that's like I guess like my biggest fear. And
yeah, that's definitely possible.
You know.
But I mean, what are you going to do? Populism is brain rot. I mean, like I've said this over and over again. It's one of the reasons why I caution people on the left that kind of push for this like anti-IDPOL, anti-liberal IDPOL ideology is pretty scary because when you start throwing away stuff like all identity politics or all intersectionality, it's pretty easy to go either hard left or hard right if literally the only thing you care about is economic policy. It's possible that Trump could implement a few things that deceptively appear left-leaning. But the reality is that like new conservatives aren't really hardcore married to capitalism. Tariffs, that's a highly anti-capitalistic idea. Locking down the border, that's a highly anti-capitalistic idea. Trump, I don't think that Trump is like a hardline capitalist, and I think that he'll pretty easily implement these different types of left-leaning policies if he sees them as popular ways to win an election.
Well, yeah, then the question is like, to me, then the foremost priority is convincing Biden or establishment Democrats or whoever it is, like trying to warn them, like, hey, you know what? Like, this can be like a real threat if this happens. Like,
well, there's nothing they can do. I mean, it's Trump is president right now, right?
Well, no, but I mean, like, the whole idea of, like, you know, maybe it would be technically be all talk, but trying to adopt those policies as well.
I mean, I'm pretty sure every Democrat is like, Biden has his form of universal health care. Biden has his form of like 15 an hour minimum wage. Like, these are policies that I'm pretty sure Biden's administration would already be willing to do. Didn't Biden himself, did he tweet out anything about the cash transfers, about like a $1,000 a month UBI thing or something? Or
not from what I saw.
Okay. I mean, I'm pretty sure that like any mainstream Democratic politician would be on board with this. I mean, they all happen. I mean, there was even home refinancing stuff under Obama. Like, it's unlikely that Biden would be unwilling to consider any of this.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess that's a good argument. I'm just nervous.
Sure.
I guess like what matters to me the most is that he either makes it more clear or tries to, I guess, campaign more on those fronts.
Well, he can't campaign on the ultra-progressive fronts because those fronts are loser policies for winning elections, right? Like, we can't, just because we're, like, regardless of how we feel about how the primaries turned out, like, Bernie got crushed. It doesn't make sense that Biden would now adopt Bernie's entire platform when he got absolutely annihilated.
Well, I'm not saying to... Okay, I have to refine the numbers of healthcare because, like, I remember, like, at least in Michigan, the people who pulled out did agree with universal healthcare. So that was,
but
like,
the problem is, like, nobody really knows what universal healthcare means. Like, even today when we poll on it, like, nobody has any idea what that entails. I think there was a KFF poll that came out showing that, like there's a million different ways you can ask the question. People still don't know, like, what exactly it entails. Hold on, give me, like, 2 minutes. I gotta run out and get my food. Sorry, 1 sec.
Okay.
Hey, Pxie. How's it going?
Hi. Who is this? Wait a second. Let me check. Is it... Just tell me, because I have to go scroll back.
What do you mean you don't know who it is?
MindWaves?
Of course.
You think I'm gonna vote for fucking Trump?
It sounds like it, the more you talk.
I definitely am not gonna vote for fucking Trump,
Whoa.
but I do think...
What's going on in here?
MindWaves win the battle.
Well, I just want to know, like, if you really meant populist and that instead of progressive when you said that, which populists are you talking about? Because I hope you know that left-wing populism is much different than right-wing populism.
Is it?
They function in similar ways, but they value different things, right?
I'm not completely sure about that, right? Because isn't that, like, the whole idea of populism in general is doing, like... Oh, well, I guess, like, then we would have to define populism exactly, right? Because when I think about populism, I think about, like, what's best for, like, your own population most of all.
So my understanding of populism is essentially when you have a candidate that identifies that every establishment is the enemy, and that candidate is promising, like, salvation through them and them alone, basically. Like, so Trump and Bernie are both populists because Trump and Bernie both say, look, the media is against you, the politicians are against you, the establishment is against you, and I'm the way out. That's essentially what populism is.
Right. And if you dive a little bit deeper, the reasoning behind both of these parties is completely different, right? And that's why left-wing populism resonates with a certain demographic of people and right-wing populism resonates with a certain demographic of people. You could say that there might be some overlap, but to say that it's a significant amount that's going to, like, determine the election and make sure that Biden has zero fucking chance, I just don't see that. I mean, we can just look at
what happened last election cycle. It's not like a fuck ton of Bernie voters jumped ship and voted for Trump. We didn't see that happen.
Well, that's why I linked the article that was, like, around 12%, which was enough in these swing states. So maybe not across the board, but it definitely impacted, like, the final result.
Yeah, but I think it was worse that we had to, I mean, like, again, there's going to be some percentage of voters that always moves. But the worst thing was that all the Obama voters just stayed home. Like, Hillary just didn't galvanize the base at all.
And that's not untypical of any election. I think that, like, around 10% is pretty typical of most elections, 2016 and others included, right? Like,
okay, I guess, like, I'm just having trouble because I'm thinking, like, you guys are making, like, really valid points, right? That Biden is not the same thing as Hillary. Hillary didn't really, like, motivate people to go out and vote. But at the same time, like, I think a lot of people are motivated to vote against Trump. But I do think that he has like a very heavy like fan base. And now that he's like trying to like implement these policies, I'm just I like, do you guys think it's a out there argument to think that like there are going to be populists out there that are like, well, he's passing these policies that our own establishment isn't even passing.
These aren't policies Trump are passing. These are literally like last resort economic emergency measures to keep the system afloat.
And most of this is going through Congress, not being implemented by Trump himself, right? Like the wasn't the stimulus that was suggesting giving families like $1,000 or whatever, wasn't that being like passed through Congress, not Trump's administration?
Yeah, and these are just a couple times. This isn't like UBI forever or anything.
Yeah, I guess my biggest contender would be about the housing stuff, about the
like halting mortgages and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even under Obama, like there were plans to like refinance your home or whatever.
But I feel, like, would you say that's the same thing, like refinancing your home and like just spending mortgages and evictions all around?
Well, I mean, like
you
couldn't do that in 2008, right? Like the whole problem was that the housing market was like completely and totally fucked. I don't know if just freezing everything would have been like a way to do that. But I do know that like the home affordable refinance program was something that happened under the Obama administration to help people to hound off like foreclosures. But also that was the catastrophe there was like so much different than what we're facing right now as well.
Okay. Because like I was going to say, like, yes, it's like a different crisis, but the whole point is that this policy is seen as one that like helps a lot of struggling people, helps working class. And if, again, I guess it goes back to like, I don't know if this is circular logic or not. If you're a populist who buys into like the anti-establishment rhetoric, and you see this guy doing something that's going to help you.
But he's only doing it in response to a catastrophe. Like, if you're dumb enough as a voter that you see, like, oh, wow, we're getting something under Trump, like, in response to the world economy shutting down due to a pandemic, I mean, like, that person is probably lost to all form of reason anyway. Like,
that's why I was saying this person that you're talking about probably isn't somebody that would have voted for Bernie Sanders because they're a progressive. This is somebody that is probably a moderate and undecided, right?
Okay, I definitely have to think more, but you guys made really good arguments.
Wow,
yeah. So yeah, that's it. I'm not gonna vote for Trump. Fuck you, MindWaves.
Look, it's just when I asked you if you were gonna vote for Biden in the general, and you said I don't know, maybe. I started becoming very worried about you. That's all I'm saying.
I said
probably. Okay,
probably,
it's not much better. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I said probably, and then I said, like, later, like, okay, I probably should not say probably, because, I mean, like, probably, like, unless if he has, like, a heart attack and dies. But people are not going to take it that way, right? People are just going to hear probably and think, like, that you're not...
Well, wait, wait, hold on. To be clear, that's not how you meant it, though, right? When you said probably, you mean you would consider not voting for him. You're not worried about the heart attack, because I guarantee that if I go back through your VODs, you've never said, like, oh, I'd probably vote for Bernie. You would have said you definitely would vote for Bernie, even though Bernie could
have...
You're
right, I definitely would vote for Bernie, yeah.
But you wouldn't vote for Bernie if he had a heart attack and died, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
She would write him in.
No, shut up. So we know that, like, when you say probably vote for Biden, it's not because you're thinking of a heart attack. It's because you would legitimately consider not voting for Biden for whatever reason.
Well, yeah, I was thinking, like, extremely, like, terrible fucking circumstances, but those are not realistic, right? So I should not use the word probably.
Probably.
And I just want to be clear that the reason I had a big issue with your tweet is because it came off as like literal praise for Trump. It didn't come off as somebody that was skeptical of Biden. I thought Lecture Fan literally wrote that tweet when I read it. I just think you need to be a little bit more precise if you're going to make that sort of point, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, because there was like a previous tweet that was talking about like, I forgot what exactly it was. It was talking about like Nazism, basically like National Socialism. And like the rise of that, and that's the first tweet before I started like my freaking rant, which is something that I agreed with, right? Like during the way that like what I was saying before, the way that Nazis took power was during like a time of economic distress, raising national sentiment, also talking about socialist sentiment, but then when actually getting into power, not implementing any of that and getting rid of the socialists instead. So that was like what I meant that was like the first prelude before I was talking about like if Trump does any of these policies or talks about implementing any of these policies, then we might be in deep shit.
I think that is a real phenomenon. I just don't think that this specific instance is indicative of that.
I don't think America is like in the same state as like post World War I Germany. I don't think that's very comparable. I mean, we can find some like pretty surface level comparisons, but I don't think we're like about to just slide into Nazism because Trump tries to like stave off the economy from completely dying.
Well, no, it's the idea that during times of like long economic distress or times of like economic stagnation, people usually look towards more extreme measures to change your situation, right? So if you have like a long period where the economy doesn't seem to be growing or where it seems to be stagnated, then you're going to look for other solutions. And that's when usually like have fascist or like extreme right-wing people take advantage of those fears or of those wants and gain power because people are looking for some.
I mean, extreme left-wing people take advantage of those fears as well, right? Like anybody could theoretically capitalize on that, you know?
Yeah, but the whole idea, and maybe this is just my complete utter bias, is that it's kind of easier to do with like fascist rhetoric or with authoritarian rhetoric because, and this might be condescending, people who tend to already like lean towards that area are less likely to question, less likely to like critically think against them. They're much more susceptible to like authoritarianism.
I mean, I think that would be true of like all sides. I know you're not exactly making this argument, but like I reject the characterization that like the Bernie voter is this like highly this highly knowledgeable voter that is super informed about all these issues. Like the amount of tweets I've seen of people, I don't know if you're doing this, if you did it or not, but like the amount of tweets I've seen of people looking at the 1.5 million repo thing that the Fed did and comparing that to like, well, we could buy, you know, education or student loan debt off or whatever. I don't know. I don't feel like these people are like highly knowledgeable voters that are like making good decisions based on like sound policy or anything.
Hey, that money printer go burr though, you know?
This isn't even a money printer though.
But the idea that I'm like trying to like put into place is that yes, I would not say that there's a bunch of like highly super educated like Bernie voters and that's the case. But that I feel like leftism itself is prone to questioning, right? The whole idea that like, oh, why is it always easier for the right to unite and for leftists like that's a lot harder? And I think it goes back to the idea that leftists are like kind of like always arguing about like ideology, economic policy, things like that, while like most righties are just
it happens on the left and right. Like we only see it because we're looking at the left, but like the Freedom Caucus, for instance, has been like a thorn in the side of the Republican Party for quite a while as well. You know, the whole Tea Party and all that shit that moved so much of the Republican base over. This idea that infighting only happens on the left isn't necessarily true. It happens politically to conservatives as well.
But I mean, wouldn't you say that conservatism, like in itself, is based on this idea of like tradition and with respect to authority?
I think conservatism as an ideology in the America right now, in the United States right now, sees itself as government's job is to give people the tools that they need to succeed. And that's the job of the government. That's like what conservatives believe, is that communities and people can take care of themselves and the government only exists to provide the absolute bare necessity tools for people to do that. I think that's what conservatism is kind of about.
Okay, because I look at, you know, I look at like evangelicals, at like right-wing like extremists. I look at even like Trump himself, and it's always like, you know, don't question, keep to the traditional structure, like, you know, adhere to your authority. And then I look at the left and people don't do that shit.
Well, that's because right now we're in primary season. Like when Trump was running, the Republican Party was pretty fractured as well. Like we forget this, but for all the talks we're having of like, if Bernie won the nomination, would the DNC take it from him? The Republican National Convention was seriously like being talked about as well. Like a lot of people were wondering, are the Republicans actually going to allow Trump to be nominated? Like we don't know. Are they going to steal it from him and give it to Cruz or Rubio? The Republican Party was highly fractured back then as well, and then eventually they came together with Trump. But
I guess my question would be: do you think if Bernie Sanders theoretically won, do you think the left wing will fall in line with him? Because I'm not sure about that statement either. Like we saw.
Well, they wouldn't fall in line because Bernie Sanders isn't popular among the Democratic Party. That would be the problem, right? They don't want to lose their seats. This is why a lot of the Republican Party has fallen under line of Trump, is because Trump is incredibly fucking popular. So if you've got a president with a 95% approval rating and he's in your party, then yeah, of course you're going to toe the line because you want to win your election again in your district. But if you get Bernie Sanders, I mean, if Bernie Sanders is more popular in the Democratic Party, then yeah, I mean, people would probably fall in line as well. If he was very popular, had high approval ratings, because they wouldn't want to lose their elections either, right?
So I was just asking, like, in theory, because I wondered, like,
I mean, in theory, if Bernie won with an overwhelming amount of support from the Democratic Party, I think 100% they would fall in line, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So how's my Twitter?
I wasn't reading it.
Did you delete the tweet yet?
No, I didn't delete the tweet. I don't like deleting tweets, but
Fair
if
enough.
people are getting, like, the wrong impression, maybe I should.
If Trump ends up doing any of the following: suspending or eliminating student loan debt. So I don't think Trump has talked about eliminating student loan debt at all, or at least I haven't heard of that if he has. Implementing UBI. I don't think that a one-time or two-time cash transfer to hurt American families is the same as UBI at all.
Well, yeah, I agree.
And then implementing Medicare for all. Trump has definitely never talked about implementing Medicare for all. I don't think. I just don't think any of these things are things that Trump is realistically talking to.
Yeah, no, I was saying, like, specifically, like, if any of those things end up happening, I feel like we're fucking screwed. But I agree, like, UBI is very different than a 1 or 2 time cash payment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if this all was to happen and you were like a Bernie supporter, then you should be happy, right? Like, oh no, Trump got rid of all student loan debt, implemented UBI, and now we have Medicare for all. Like, that's successful then. That's like the president bending to the will of the American people, if we assume that that's what the American people want, right?
Well, it's good, but it's also bad in the sense that I honestly think Trump is a fascist, right? And this is how we get, like, with, like, kind of like Nazi socialism. And this whole idea that I honestly think that if he gets, like, a second term into power, we're going to lead to, like, more authoritarian measures. So it's good in the sense, like, damn, like, I was able to get policies that I really agree with passed, but then it's bad in the sense that I really worry about another 4 more years of Trump and, like, the power that's going to have.
But then we would have to talk about identity politics then, because now we're moving on to social issues, if that's what we care about more than economic issues, which I care a great deal about. I think social issues and economic issues are two sides of the same perfectly balanced Thanos dagger, which is one of the big contentions I have with a lot of left-leaning people. So, for instance, when Hassan says things like, oh, like, there might be some meaningless cultural issues that Democrats and Republicans are different on, but economically, you know, they're all the same or whatever. Well, I think that a lot of those meaningless little issues, like gay marriage or things like prison reform or, you know, things like sexism or racism, like, I think that these are actually really important things. I don't think these are just meaningless little quibbles between the two. But if you constantly if you constantly push aside all forms of identity politics and you only want to talk about economic policy and all you care about is class, then I don't think you should be too surprised if it only takes a couple economic policies from Trump to get people over to that side of the aisle.
Well, yeah, so shouldn't we be worried about that if those, like, economic policies are enough to get somebody in the other side of the aisle? But
well, yeah, of course. This is why I constantly shit on socialists, because I think class protectionism is stupid. I think identity politics is really important. I think intersectionalism is a really important lens to view people through. But I think that most Democrats are still generally on board with that. It's only the people it's only like the Kyle Kalinskis and the Michael Brooks and all of the Hassan Pikers, these people that are, like, really far left that are in danger of, like, all of a sudden becoming Trump voters. Like, a person that supported, you know, like Obama or Hillary Clinton or even Biden isn't just going to randomly become a Trump voter because they actually care about, you know, children being locked in cages at the wall, or they actually care about Trump, you know, talking about shithole countries or rapist Mexicans or whatever. But people that are very far left, that are like socialists or whatever, they don't actually care that much about these things. They just see it all as another form of class struggle. So it's easy for them to switch between Bernie or Trump because there's not really that much difference between their overall ideologies in terms of how they approach, you know, political things. Like, I have the same chief criticism of Trump and Bernie in that they're both highly protectionist, you know, controlling immigration from borders and, you know, controlling exports and exports and imports via, like, tariffs and stuff. Like, Bernie and Trump both align completely on that. You know, thinking all of our trade deals are catastrophic and they ruin the American worker. Trump and Bernie are lockstep in that type of ideology. You know, empowering local American businesses, buy American, worry about American stuff. Trump and Bernie are lockstep in that. So yeah, I mean, like, economically speaking, there's not that much difference, I don't think, between like a left populist and a right populist. You have to go to the social issues to actually start to find big differences.
Again, even on that issue, I would say at a surface level, that's true. But if you look deeper, the way that they want to solve these issues is completely different, right? Like Trump wants to like shut down the border. He wants to say that we're going to bring coal jobs back, whereas Bernie wants to shift the economy in like a different direction. So like I think that like the policies that they propose is different, but like the way that they approach the issue is definitely similar.
I mean, some of the policies are similar. Some of the policies are different. Like I think Bernie and Trump would both be on board with tariffs. It wouldn't surprise me if Bernie could be moved to be more anti-immigration. I don't know exactly where he stands in terms of how open the border should be. I'm not sure. I know that he's okay. I think he was okay with amnesty for illegals, but yeah. I mean,
Trump would never be pro DACA, pro like all that shit, like pro immigration. Like Bernie has come out being pretty pro like for the immigrants in that sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Whereas Trump would never do
where
that.
where the Democratic Party is right now. Yeah. Yeah. Wasn't Bernie anti H-1B visa? I'm not sure. That sounds like a program that he would be against, sure, because he would want American workers to be hired instead of foreign workers. Yeah.
I mean, but like, aren't you guys kind of worried in that sense, right?
Worried about what?
So, yeah, it's true that, and I've talked about it before, that Trump and Bernie do share like similar economic policies, but they're very different when it comes to social issues for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that Trump is racist, Bernie isn't, right? At the end of the day, like that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, if you care about identity politics, then that's where that critique would come from. Bernie is against open borders as well. I didn't realize that. He calls it a Koch brothers conspiracy. So yeah, Bernie's probably closer aligned to Trump on immigration issues than most people realize. It would be my guess if you had an in-depth conversation about it. But I haven't heard him talk about it too much. I'm not sure.
But like this whole idea that what is it? Acting as if people only care about identity politics and like not economics. I feel like that isn't like a very safe view to take when it comes to the general election.
Well, no, I mean you have to take into account both, right? That's the important part. You have to worry about the id poll side and you've got to worry about the class side, right?
Well, do you think the DNC is doing a good job when it comes to the class side?
Well, I mean, Biden is overwhelmingly destroying the primary so far, so it seems like it. I mean, I guess. What should they be doing that they're not doing right now? Or do you mean the Democratic Party in general, or?
I guess I mean like the Democratic Party in general, or I'm not sure.
The Democratic Party right now can't do anything. They don't have any control on the Senate. They don't have control of the executive branch. So I mean,
there was something I was gonna say. I also have like kind of I guess like contention with the idea that. And I know it sounds contradictory, but with the idea that primary season is like a very good way to gauge how the general election is going to go. Hillary Clinton won the primary, like with a lot of contention. I think that even if like Biden wins the primary, there's going to be still a lot of people who are kind of not content with that. I don't think that's like being properly addressed. I don't know how you'd address it, to be honest, but I
well,
think
he's starting to try to address that by adopting some of the policies of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, right? He's already tried to make that step to appeal to the progressives. Well, didn't he literally adopt Elizabeth Warren's plan to about for student loan debt or something like that?
I'm not sure. I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, he made a big announcement recently that he was taking some proposals from Bernie and some proposals from Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, Biden, I'm just looking real quick, a Forbes article titled Biden Forgives Student Loans in Bankruptcy. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they had I mean, I already know, I'm pretty sure Biden is already in favor of like a national minimum wage. I know like a $15 minimum wage. I'm pretty sure Biden talked about massively like his massive Medicare expansion that he wants to do to build on the ACA. Like Biden is already like a fairly progressive-ish candidate, not as much as Warren and Bernie, but it's not like he's like not pushing for any left-leaning ideas, I don't think. Oh, he endorsed Warren's student loan debt bill and free college for those earning under $125,000.
I mean, you could make criticisms of like, well, maybe you think that he's not genuine in that proposal or that he's just adopting it to pander towards the votes that he needs to get elected. But I mean, we really can't know that until he gets into office at the end of the day, right?
I mean, this is one more thing I'm afraid of, right? let's say Biden does win, he gets into office, and he doesn't actually like try to pass these proposals that he's talking about, then don't you think that's going to lead to like a bigger backlash, like the next 4 years after that?
Yeah, I mean, of course it could if he lies and he gets into
People
office.
people
and
said
does
this 4
something.
years ago, though.
Sure. Well, I mean, like, yeah, but I mean, like what you just described, that should happen. If he gets into office and he doesn't pass anything, then yeah, there should be a backlash, of course.
Yeah.
But, like,
And that's how you move the
Mhm.
progressive. That's how you move the Democratic Party more and more progressive, right? Which has been happening. I mean, just 4 years ago, you look at the establishment candidates that were pushing policies, and they're far less progressive than the establishment candidates like Biden and Pete Buttigieg and stuff like that that are way more progressive than they were even 8 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess like what I'm just thinking is that if at the end of these 4 years it doesn't happen, I honestly think a lot of people are going to lose like faith in the American system or in the American like elections, because you're going to be like, okay, well, these people talk a lot of the talk but they don't walk the talk, so I might as well.
Well, the problem is like politics are hard. The problem is that like a lot of people assume that all of America is on board with this, and the only thing standing between them is the Democratic Party. But that's just not true. Obama only had Congress for 2 years, and even as part of that, like fighting for the healthcare plan that he got in was a massive uphill struggle. People think that like whoever gets into office can just pass their entire agenda, via executive fiat. For the first 2 years, if Biden or Bernie were president, you're still going to have a Republican-controlled Senate. Not much is going to get done. Unless some Republican Senate seats are actually being threatened by some of these policy positions, you're not going to really see Biden or Bernie pass a lot of legislation or any meaningful legislation through Congress regardless. But I mean, that's just the system working as intended. You have to get support across the entire United States for you to actually get stuff done.
I mean,
yeah, and none of this really changes until we consider electoral reform, until we change the way that our democracy works
Sure,
through
but
different measures.
even if we did change electoral reform, you still have to get like even if Hillary won the popular vote, it was by 3 million votes. Like there's still a lot of people that are Republicans. For some reason, when we're online, we just assume that like 95% of America are liberals and only 5% are conservative. They're just dumb hicks stuck out in the sticks somewhere. But that's not true. There's a lot of Republicans in the United States that we just seem to not even recognize their existence of.
Right, which is why I think lately I've been trying to make a point to, if you're really a progressive, we need to make it. We need to work more on like not becoming jaded just because our candidate didn't win an election, and more focus on doing what we can in our personal lives, kind of like advocating for a cultural change in the United States to make our politics more conducive towards progressive issues in the future, right?
Well, I think the idea.
I mean,
or go ahead. Sorry.
mhm. I mean, I definitely agree with you. But I'm not going to lie that I'm a little bit salty, because I feel like if you do want to make progressive politics more progressive in the future, you do have to address like systematic issues that happen within the Democratic Party, or the ideas that,
like
hey,
what?
I would argue that one of these things, or maybe this isn't like specifically the DNC, but more like these local, I guess like the local state party of the Democrats or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, not having a lot of like voting booths or voting locations when it comes to like college campuses, right? Trying to like get like voter turnout to go like higher when it comes to youth, addressing problem like the fact that Biden
But
doesn't
Democrats
even
have fought for voter rights like harder than Republicans have. Republicans are the party that are constantly trying to get like voter rights like taken away from black people, from minorities, from younger people. Like they're the ones that are pushing for the national idea. Like the Democratic Party is like for the past decades like fought against this pretty relentlessly, you know?
No, I agree on a national scale, but I'm talking about like addressing reform within the own party.
I don't think Democrats in their own party are like trying to destroy voter turnout.
I think when it comes to young populations, like yes, especially when you look at like university campuses and like the voting selection there, like the voting booths like available to go vote. I think also this whole idea, like maybe this sounds like really bad for you guys, but I think the fact that Democrats talk a lot about like black voter turnout, which is, necessary, absolutely, but then completely ignore like Hispanic voter turnout, I think that's also kind of worrying, right?
Who's ignoring Hispanic voter turnout? What do you mean?
Well, you're right. In the last debate, they addressed it. But I'm talking about like before that. That Bernie Sanders was like getting consistently like higher Hispanic vote, but whenever you tune into like news channels, and like nobody ever mentioned that. I guess like that's
I think that because
anecdotal.
Hispanics haven't been seen as like a primary backbone of the Democratic Party the same way that the African American vote has been. Like that's probably going to change in the future as Hispanics. They might have already become the largest demographic group in the U.S. or I know they're on their way to being that. But like there's a couple of like structural issues with Hispanic people as well. For instance, Hispanic people tend to be far younger than African Americans as well, and historically haven't
And far
been.
less likely to turn out for elections, by the way. That's why you shouldn't rely on the like Hispanic vote to win an election solely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then also like I don't think that Bernie is necessarily crushing it with Hispanics as hard as it seems when you actually take into account who shows up to vote. I know that a lot of the polling has him like pretty up there, but I mean on the flip side, you know, a lot of the polling has Biden crushing African American support as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I guess like what I was trying to like address was these ideas that if the Democratic Party, it's true that young voter turnout is not as high as it should be or that we would want it to be. But the whole idea is that as these voters grow older, as the Democratic Party like keeps progressing, they kind of do have to eventually adapt to these ideas or risk alienation from this growing base.
Well, yeah, and they will, but I mean, like, it's not like Hispanics are moving over to support Republicans anytime soon, right? Like, even the last Republican Hispanic group in the U.S. Is what I'm aware of was Cuban people, but even they've I think are now majority Democratic voters as well. It's not like the Democratic Party is losing that voter base.
Well, maybe like losing to Republicans, not necessarily, but the whole idea of becoming like more unmotivated or completely washing their hands off the system.
I mean, I guess that could happen, but I guess we'll have to see in the general. Like right now, the voter turnout has hit like insane highs for some of these primaries. So it seems hard to believe that these people all just feel disenfranchised with the system. I mean, they're
Right.
turning
And
up
we
to vote
have
in the
more of a
primaries, at least.
we have more of a youth turnout this time around in the primaries than we did in 2016, which you could say that, yeah, 17% isn't enough still, but it is more, right? And I think that you're right to point out that some people may feel alienated from their democracy, but we don't solve that by just throwing a fit, right? We need to, like, people like you and like anybody else that considers themselves an advocate needs to encourage young voters despite despite being disenfranchised or despite being disencouraged from participating in democracy, they need to actually go and show up to vote, right? Like that is crucial.
Yeah, of course. I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. But I guess like what I'm trying to bring up is this whole idea that there's also just a giant divide when it comes to the Democratic Party with like Biden and Bernie, right?
There's a giant divide for what?
Biden and Bernie. I think it's like voters who are 35 years or younger are overwhelmingly more for Bernie Sanders than Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And it's all like you're right that we have to. Okay, sorry. You're right that the whole idea or the whole solution isn't to throw a fit, but I guess I'm just asking you guys, what can we do to bridge that divide?
Well, we don't need to bridge it right now. Young people just don't vote. Like that's a divide that you worry about bridging when they become like election relevant, right? That's like that'd be like you're coming up to a turn that's a mile ahead of you, but you want to turn left right now to get ready for the turn. Like you don't want to try to appeal to younger voters that aren't going to show up and then lose some of your older voters as a result of that. Like you appeal to the younger voters when they get older and they start voting, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm. Like it seems like I understand like we're in a pretty unprecedented era right now in terms of like the pandemic, but like, and I'm not trying to accuse anybody of like any motivated reasoning, but it's you can't really say like if you're a Bernie supporter like, oh, now is the time where Biden needs to start taking on all of these Bernie approved economic plans when it seems like Bernie was pretty sadly defeated in the primaries by Biden in most of these states. So like, it seems strange that like that's the path forward. Like if it was, it feels like the turnout would have gone a little bit differently in a lot of these primaries.
I mean, again, like I have kind of a trouble talking about like primaries being like an accurate description for the general election.
Well, primaries are like, I would trust primaries a lot closer than I would like polling, right? Primaries are actually like, this is the closest we have to like the metal meeting the grindstone or whatever, the pedal getting to the metal in terms of like finding out what are people actually going to do. You know, we can poll people until we're blue in the face, but primaries are where you actually go out and you cast one ballot for one person and that's your vote.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm trying to think about how to explain this in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the people who are voting for Biden want to return to normalcy. They want things to go back to the way they were.
Mm-hmm.
People who are voting Bernie are definitely not like that. They definitely don't like the system how it is right now.
Sure.
So if we're in a general election and if it's like Biden versus Trump, you're going to have like Trump's hardcore fan base. You're going to have some accelerationists, but I think those are a minority. And then you're going to have independents who weren't going to vote like Biden anyways and might have only been interested in Bernie for like whatever strange reason. Who are also like who might vote Trump, right? And like what you said before, there's always.
I don't think that there's this huge independent bend towards Bernie Sanders. Like it always seems like we're pretending that there's this massive demographic of people that are like ready to vote for Bernie in the general, but wouldn't vote for Biden in the general. Like wherever we can try to like dig up these like magical voters at, there's going to be 50 times more of them that would have voted for Biden over Bernie if Bernie would have gotten the nomination, or at least that seems to be how the election is turning out right now. Like I'm sure there's probably some independents that won't vote for Biden for whatever reasons that might have voted for somebody like Yang or somebody like Bernie, but I think that number is relatively insignificant when you look at the massive turnout that Biden was able to get for people that are voting for him.
I'm not. I have to find the exact numbers right now, which is what I'm trying to do because I don't believe I agree with your statement that Bernie does not garner like a larger independent vote than Biden. But I would agree with your statement that if Biden is able to get a large enough voter turnout, it would negate that anyways. Which I guess just comes back to like predictions that we can't 100% make that of whether Biden is going to bring up such a large voter turnout. But that we can hopefully look forward to because the primary has had a large voter turnout.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something we have to look forward to, right? Like, we have to bring back the people that voted for Obama. We need to bring them back to the voting booth in the general, and it seems like Biden is the guy to do that versus Bernie. Like, Biden wants to build on the Obama presidency quite a bit. He was obviously Biden wants to build on the Obama presidency quite a bit. He was obviously Obama's VP. Like, it seems more likely than not that he's probably the guy we would need to bring those voters back to the voting booths.
Yeah, and I wouldn't undersell the voters wanting a return to normalcy as like as if it's like not a huge motivating factor for a lot of people, right? Like having Trump in office is a huge motivating factor for people to turn out in masses for Biden.
Yeah. I definitely have to think about some of the arguments that you guys said more, but I do agree with a lot of them. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think I'm gonna go.
Sure.
But thank you very much for talking to me about this and changing my mind on some things. I appreciate it.
No problem. Be careful. Don't be a socialist, okay? All right. I love everybody.
Be a socialist. Just be a good one, okay, Pxie? I love you. Later.
Bye.
Is a better idea than waiting for the revolution.
No, this I agree with. I can absolutely get behind this.